So, Dom, Mary, Morbid Movies podcast. What are we doing
Right.
today? What are we doing?
Today, we are going to be talking about the 2006 Hogfather miniseries that was done for Sky TV. It's based on the book of the same name by Terry Pratchett. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what we're gonna. That's what we're gonna do. All
that's what we're
right.
doing.
Merry
We made
Christmas,
it.
all that stuff. Happy holidays. Woo! Okay, yeah. So this was, I remarked to you off record before we started this recording, and I started my fit of laughter. Wonderful hat, by the way, Mary. Happy
Thank you.
holidays from the other side of the world. Lots of love to you and yours. I watched The Hogfather last night, and 3 hours long. Um, it it's it's something. It's something. I mean, I love death.
Hmm.
I love the characters in this. I had a soft spot, as usual, because I'm a weirdo. I have a soft spot for the villain. Very well played. I really enjoyed it. I was not to the much disgust, that makes sense. To the disgust of my friends and most of my family, I am not a Terry Pratchett reader. I am aware of the universe, the Discworld, which of course this is very prominently set in. But as sort of my first exposure to the world of Pratchett, this was interesting. I'm fascinated by things with law. I'm fascinated by the ideas, and very much like with the other films we've covered on this podcast, the aesthetic that was created around this this world. So I really enjoyed it. What was it like for you going back, as I know you are a reader of Pratchett and the Discworld sort of vibe? What was it like going back to this for you?
I'll be honest, I watch this every year with my family usually, and this was actually my introduction to Pratchett as well as some friends said, "Hey, we have something we think you'd like," and they showed me this. So I think it's a good gateway for the more goth inclined Pratchett reader, especially since the character of death comes up in quite a few other books, and I think there's two or three others with Susan in them as well. So, you can spend more time with those characters
Yeah.
if that's kind of your entry point is that sort of darker side of Discworld.
Yeah, it definitely caught my interest. Again, I think there's a series I was researching. I think there's a series of death books as
Mhm.
well. So I think if anybody wants to drop in the comments, and once again, thank you to those people that have supported us this year. This is a fairly new thing. We get to do this once a month. We try and do one episode a month. We really do appreciate everybody's support. If you want to drop a comment in, to recommend other books and things like that for people, that'd be wonderful. The cast here, because obviously we're talking about the visual representation,
Mhm.
really interesting legends in British television, particularly Tony Robonson,
Mhm.
David Jason, who many will know from Only Fools and Horses, which is of course a British classic. I was fascinated in Marc Warren's take on Tia Time, or yeah, Tia Time. I got it right. A British actor
Mhm.
playing an American. I thought that was the standout sort of
Oh,
performance for me.
he's really fantastic. I've only other thing I've seen him in is Jonathan Strange in Mr. Norrell, where he does another kind of weird, creepy guy part. I don't know if that's the norm for him, but he's very good at that.
Yeah, it was really fantastic.
Mm.
Michelle Dockery as Susan, it fits that kind of kind of goth mold for a lot of people. I'm sure she was a very popular character on release. The aesthetic and the vibe is very cool. It reminded me of the kind of 90s, early 2000s characters that we saw in movies like Edward Scissorhands. And a lot of Tim Burton stuff, that kind of
Mhm.
alternative female lead, strong female lead, which I loved. Obviously, Death, Ian Richardson, another legend. Of course, I believe this was his last role as the narrator and as the voice of Death. Um, I love the subversion of it. Again, as somebody that's not not necessarily au fait with the world and the lore of Discworld and Pratchett. I love the subversion, having Death play the Hogfather, Santa Claus,
Mhm.
effectively in this alternative world. From your perspective, then, Mary, again, as somebody that sort of has you know watched this and checked it out, what were some of your favorite cast moments and castings in this film?
Well, I mean, as we discussed before, I think Marc Warren is Mr. Teatime or Tea Time, depending on how you say it, was a great choice. But I mean, it's hard to choose because I feel like everyone clicks into their parts so well in this. Like, this was something I remember when I watched the making of documentary. The director actually talked about how they had the freedom to cast the who fit, and they didn't have that pressure a lot of films do to cast whoever's biggest now, which is nice because I feel like something like this, if it were made in, Hollywood today, like it or not, you'd probably have Chris Pratt in it, or something like that because you got to check that box. But I think that the strength of this is a lot of them are prominent actors, but they're also the right actor,
Yeah,
which helps.
absolutely. I mean, my sleeper hit, for great casting was Stephen Marcus as Banjo. I found myself empathizing and sympathizing with Banjo's character, of course. Quite a difficult character in terms of he's effectively a bad guy, but people do empathize and sympathize with Banjo by
Mhm.
the end of the film, even though he's responsible for a pretty harsh death. And that's one of
Mhm.
the things that I wanted to talk about was this film is very much a family film, but there are some quite dark moments in it, Mary. Where you've got these deaths. There's a scissors moment for Mr. Sidney, the wizard. There's of course Banjo throwing somebody down the stairs. Somebody gets sucked into a wardrobe. So what I think is most fascinating about this is this kind of playful, childish, world, but some quite heavy deaths and also themes, Mary, which obviously we'll go on to talk about. But I wonder to get your if because it's we do typically we've done darker films, some elements of horror on this podcast, and it was an interesting pick for you to do the Hogfather and sort of send it to me because I was like, even though it's a Christmas film, we are at Christmas, currently recording in December of 2024.
Mhm.
Um, it is a Christmas film, but it also has those dark and dare I say, elements of horror in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that really typifies Terry Pratchett's work in general is there is obviously that kind of warmth and whimsy to it, but he acknowledges that there is a lot of darkness in the world, but he does it in sort of a these things are terrible, but we can do something about it way. And I find really appealing. It's he's not sugarcoating things, he understands, but there's things that are worth striving for, and that's a strong theme in this film as well. I mean, I feel like by the end they kind of spell it out even
Mm.
in some of the conclusions that there are things worth believing in.
Yeah, and I want to go on to some of your trivia. I always love getting your emails through when we're prepping for these episodes with trivia because there's some lovely little Easter eggs in this. But in terms of a favorite scene for you, if we're looking at kind of favorite moments, because there's quite a few really touching moments here. Of course, Death taking on the Hogfather. Sort of alias at first, that reconnection between Death, of course, as Susan's grandfather, and that familial connection, and of course, the general aesthetic of the set. David Jason's constant quest for a cigarette. I always thought that was really comedic. But for me, it was the lovely moment where Hex, the thinking machine, he's being asked by Death, "Do you believe?" And then, of course, the thinking machine Hex says, "Yes." Dear Hogfather, can I have this and this and this? And I thought that was a really cool moment because it just goes to show again, going on to the themes as we'll talk about the from a I know it was a machine, but the power of belief and the power of having something to believe in this context, even for a piece of machinery, was really really cool. Do you have a favorite scene to get to go back to?
It's really hard, but I think I really do like the scene when they're in the Tooth Fairy's castle and Susan is facing off against Mr. Teatime um at the end, and she just calls him on exactly what he is. Like I don't know, really enjoy that moment. And I just love Susan as a character so much. It's always kind of a standout moment when she's in the scene. So
Absolutely, again, incredibly well played, and a really strong female lead or co-lead at least, which I think is, I think is fantastic. I also want to give a slight shout out to the Veruca gnome, which I thought was a very entertaining bit of character work in this film as well. So yeah, in terms of the themes, that belief, I mean, there's an element now as doing a bit of research. It's not necessarily, criticizing our society for having so much belief in fantastical characters, but it's more a reflection on the power of belief, both positive and negative, I think, and how that can affect people. If you give somebody something to believe in, they will believe in it to you know they can use that belief for great things, for wonderful things, or they can use it negatively. Again, your points are, of course, you've got the negative characters, the villains that use it for negative, and they want to control the children, they want to control belief and use it to take over the world and rid the world of these fantastical creatures. And then of course you've got the good death, who wants to uphold this belief as a way to inspire and motivate. That's at least what I took from it, Mary. I don't know about you.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good summary of things, and belief is so integral to the entire story. Just that, I mean, I find it really interesting too when they're Death and Susan are discussing it, and she does say to him, "What would have happened?" And and his explanation being, it's like instead of the sun coming up, a glowing ball would have risen in the sky. It's like life would go on, but that magic would be lost. Like it's just important to being human to have these beliefs and have something to strive to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, is that what you took from it? Obviously, it's important enough for you to bring it back for this podcast in, 2024. Important enough for you to think about as a Christmas film or an alternative Christmas film, as it were. You know, when you go back to it, do you find yourself, because there's some lovely little moments in this. Of course, Terry Pratchett has a cameo in it. There's, of course, little references in there. I believe Until Inside is a reference to Intel Inside, which is,
Hmm.
of course, that sort of little references in there. Hogswatch, there's a 12 Days of Hogswatch series of featurettes as well. So there was a really nice kind of world built around this. So when you go back into the world now in 2024, do you still take the same things again? That belief and the power of belief.
Yeah, I think if anything, I feel like it's more important now and in many ways more relevant to our current moment in time. So much of what is happening around us is being driven by the power of people's beliefs, for good or bad. So I think it's important for people to continue believing in good things and pushing for those, especially now when a lot of the world is in a dark place. So
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
anything, I kind of feel it more now.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point you make, and I do think again, if you go back and watch the whole hog, which is of course the documentary that you referenced, there's a number of interviews in that where people talk about the magic of this world and just how. But one thing that struck me when each of these actors and performers were talking about this, and obviously there was some talk about a sequel or at least another film down the line. There is this belief and this hope almost in that sort of permeates this film, even though we're struggling against some quite shady characters. The
Hmm.
Tia Time is of this world. There is power in belief and power in hope if it's used in the right way. As you said, the big theme is belief determines truth, which shall set you free. And of course, the auditors in this. You could argue, you could make the comparison to some of the governments, both in the UK, where I am, and the US, where you are. You know, are they the right people to make the decision on what's right for the world or right for the Discworld in this case, Mary? I don't know if you have any thoughts
Mhm.
on that.
Um, uh, it's a heavy subject, but no, I mean, I think you're right on with that. Just, thinking about again, it is all just how much of our beliefs and the information we see, whether or not it's true, just is affecting our reality now.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. On a lighter note, in one of your facts, and I'm going to ask you to come up with some of your favorite facts from the film. One of mine that I took from your list was that Terry Pratchett himself was stopped in Australia because of the plastic teeth for this film. Of course, teeth become a central part of this. All of the Teatime's search for death begins, of course, with the Tooth Fairy. Not to spoil too much of the film for those that haven't seen it, or the series rather. I thought that was a really nice little fact that Pratchett himself was stopped because of all the teeth. I don't know if you have a favorite little fact, because I know you did some digging before we began
Yeah.
this
Uh,
episode.
the teeth is definitely one of the fun ones. There's just also so many weird little references and things tucked in, and that's also present if you read Terry Pratchett books. Like they're so reference dense that it's you won't catch them all. Um, Let me see, what do I like for there's so many, I gotta pick one. Well, I found it interesting when I was reading about it. Marc Warren's portrayal of Mr. Teatime was very heavily inspired by Johnny Depp's role as Willy Wonka and Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, as well as the voice of Peter Lorre. And I'm not a huge fan of the Johnny Depp Willy Wonka movie. I think it's super weird and creepy, but
Yeah.
in a not good way.
Yeah, yeah. It's divisive, isn't it? It's divisive,
Yeah,
I think.
I'm too much of a fan of the Gene Wilder.
Mhm.
So it was nice to find out some good came from it.
Yeah.
It's it was not my favorite version. So that was kind of nice. And I mean I also liked when I was watching the documentary when they were discussing the character of Susan that she was meant to be like a goth Mary Poppins in
Yeah.
essence. I like that description. I think it sums it up so well.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and that drove their decision to put her into a more Edwardian costume. She dresses more modern than a lot of Discworld characters tend to, since there's
Mm.
sort of a blending of eras in there to a point.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really fascinating. And it certainly was inspired. And obviously I mentioned kind of the long-term impact on other people. I think for me, I'm really looking forward to, I know I referenced it earlier, but going back and watching that 12 Days of Hogswatch series
Mhm,
where Death interviews Terry Pratchett and others. I love that to explain aspects of the Discworld. And for me, as somebody that's new to it, I'm looking forward to going back to that. I also want to shout out, of course, the very difficult job of Marnix van der Broek, who plays Death, is in terms of his physical role, six foot
mhm,
seven Dutchman. The nuances of getting that right, because he's not a speaking role. He has to trigger, I believe he triggers the lines, from the mask.
mhm,
But also just the little head movements and subtle movements like that, I thought was really fantastic. In terms of sort of people that I don't imagine get as much credit as they should. I think the guy behind Death really deserves his flowers for this performance.
Absolutely, and it definitely can't be overstated since Death, the mask he's wearing doesn't have moving parts, so
Mm,
he doesn't even have like mouth movements to work with. he conveyed so much just through the way he moved his body, and that's definitely got to be difficult when you're in that many layers of like prosthetic fingers and different things that are an extension beyond what you're used to working with. So
Yeah.
he deserves quite a bit of credit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for anybody watching this who wants to go and watch the end result, which of course we're talking about now, 3 hours is a long time. But I think if again, I think if you want to get lost in a world at Christmas, if you want something that is entertaining but is also going to keep the kids on the edge of their seat, there's some stuff in there that's a little bit dark, but I do believe, as I say, it's something that you watch with your family, and something I watched with my partner, who loved the mouse, by the way. The little mouse Santa was certainly a high point for my partner. I think it is a family film, Mary. I mean, you watch it with your family, and like you say, but you're also big into goth films. Would you recommend this to any listeners with kids? Would you sort of advise them to proceed with any kind of caution? I think it's got that kind of Ed Wood slash Frankenweenie Tim Burton style. I do believe that kids can watch this, and it's not gonna, even though the scissors implied death for the wizard was quite did catch me off guard. I don't think that there's anything in here that's going to, cause too much trauma, as it were.
I would say I think most kids wouldn't have too much trouble with this. If someone has a kid who's particularly sensitive, they might want to double check it. But for the most part, I don't think, I mean, there's nothing particularly graphic or gory in
Mm,
it.
mm,
So, I
mm.
think that it should be okay. Like I said, it's just one of those things where if you do have a child who is particularly sensitive or easily scared, maybe watch it ahead of time. But for
Yeah.
the most part, I think that, if a kid can get through Nightmare Before Christmas, they can probably handle this. It's to
Fantastic.
shout out to the other movie where a skeleton pretends to be Santa. So
Absolutely. Yeah, excellent, excellent double reference in there, Mary. So obviously, I've asked for people in the comments to put recommendations in, but for you yourself, as co-host of this podcast, where would you recommend if people are, because you mentioned that this was, one of your big introductions, what would you recommend people do if they want to get involved in Pratchett, in the Discworld, wider world? Like I say, I'm going to go and watch the 12 Days of Hogswatch this afternoon because I love the idea of death interviewing these individuals. But for you, what would you recommend people start? Where can people go if they want to get their Discworld fix from this?
right on. Well, if you're someone who likes watching the miniseries format, there are actually two others. The Color of Magic, which is the same director as Hogfather, and there's also one called Going Postal. And both of those also had Terry Pratchett's involvement and are pretty faithful and have very similar vibes, and quite a few of the same actors appear in both, as in The Color of Magic. You have got Sir David Jason is playing a part in that, and Stephen Marcus also has a small role in that as well. I think there's a few others, but I don't remember off the top of my head. So that's a good place for anyone who'd prefer to watch something to get started. But otherwise, there's a ton of Discworld books, and there's a few different ways you can read them. So you can do chronological, or if you just want to go online, look up which books have Death or Susan in them. They tend to um, stand alone pretty well for the most part, but just checking online on the reading order is probably the easiest way to go with that. And there's a pretty huge community online of Pratchett fans, so you're definitely going to find plenty of information if you go seeking for it. And I haven't read every Discworld book, but I've read a lot of them, and they're all pretty good, honestly. So
Fantastic,
yeah.
fantastic. Well, for me personally, I think we've covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time. I think we could, I'd love to make these episodes 3 hours long, but I do think, like I say, my recommendation is if you're into fantastical worlds, particularly worlds with lore, and in a whole sort of backstory, go and watch this film. I think one of the great strengths of this podcast is we focus on films with great aesthetics. I think the Tooth Fairy's kind of palace, or whatever that is called, whatever that is referred to as in the series, it has a beautiful aesthetic. So there's so many highlights. Again, I think it is very much a winter, winter film, and something that people of all ages can enjoy. And some good messages as well. Even though David Jason's character of Arthur eventually gets his cigarette, he doesn't want it. So by the end of it. But also there's obviously some anti-authority messages, and also the message of hope that we've touched on, and the power of belief. So hopefully you take something from that. Mary, obviously we are heading into 2025. As I did at the beginning, I want to wish you a happy holidays to you and your family.
Thank you. You
It's
too.
yeah, and I wish to the people that have watched this podcast and supported us so far, to wish you guys a happy holiday. Do you have anything to add? Do you already have an idea about what our next episode is going to be? And are you excited for 2025?
Uh, I don't. I'm excited for some things that will happen in 2025, but I think you know, the future remains to be seen here. And I'm excited about doing the podcast going forward. I'm not 100% sure what the next episode's going to be. So
We'll figure it all out. We'll figure it
we'll
all
work it
out.
out
Fly by the seat of our pants. You know,
as usual.
yeah, as taking cue from Death, playing the Hogfather, working out his ho ho ho. We will try it and see what happens, and go from there. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. However you choose to consume our work, from Dom and Mary at Morbid Movies Podcast. Happy holidays, happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2025.
Happy holidays,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.